There's a deep scepticism about politics and the political process. I think there's a sense of cynicism about it and perhaps a lack of belief in the ability of politics to make a difference. I think we've all got to think very hard about what is causing that disillusionment and disaffection and how we can work together to put it right. Some young people undoubtedly do feel disconnected from some institutions, but equally there are some very strong institutions in our communities that young people are very much a part of. So in my own constituency, the youth service is used and young people are very active in it. It's the case that many of our schools do very well and our students feel very, very much part of their school communities. It's also, of course, the case that there are young people who, for example, feel that the police could be prejudiced against them, who may feel quite alienated from education and feel it hasn't got anything to offer them. So I think it's a mixed picture, and where there is alienation and suspicion, we need to understand the reasons for that and try to address them. Well, I think we know quite a lot about the causes of the riots because we've got the findings of the independent Riots, Communities and Victims panel. And it certainly highlights the fact that many of the young people who were involved had not done well at school, had had previous involvement with the criminal justice system, and it seems that the engagement that they'd had with those institutions hadn't particularly worked well for them.
Do you believe the police produce a sense of alienation amongst young people, particularly those from deprived backgrounds?
I think there are issues in terms of the way young people feel that they're treated by the police. It's true that in some areas local police community support officers have formed very, very good relationships with young people in their communities, and I really welcome that positive neighbourhood policing. It's also true though that young people do report that they feel that the police can sometimes pick on them just because they're young people, they're hanging about, they're not doing any harm, but the police do tend to be sceptical and suspicious. There's no doubt that they perceive that ethnicity can sometimes be a factor in the way that they're treated by the police, and it's certainly the case that there are difficulties in some places in the relationship between young people and the police that the police need to attend to. I think that there are problems that the panel's report has identified about young people's engagement with institutions, but equally it was clear that the lack of access to jobs and employment opportunities for young people was a very significant factor too. The Riots and Victims panel has been pretty clear that many of those who were involved were underachieving in education, felt school had nothing to offer them. So clearly a factor, but equally it's important to remember that very many young people weren't involved in the riots, doing very, very well at school, and standards have actually been rising. I don't think that they're missing. They may not be seen to be relevant in some communities, and it may be that, for example, public spending cuts are putting some of their reach and services under threat. In my own area, for example, we're looking at very significant cuts to our youth service, and that's bound to mean that in terms of the services they can offer, we will see a reduction. Find the issues that matter to young people, engage young people in discussion and analysis of what those issues are, ensure that young people have direct access to decision makers to shape the decisions that are taken that affect their lives, and be very, very alert to the fact that young people's experiences now they're having some quite tough times. Youth unemployment is reaching 1 million. That's a lot of young people who must feel that the world hasn't got much to offer them. We have to think much, much, much harder about how we actually ensure that young people are growing up to be given every opportunity to fulfil their personal potential. I think it's right to look for holistic programmes, community-based holistic programmes, like the Troubled Families programme, and indeed like the Whole Place initiatives, the community budgeting initiatives that are being developed following the initial Labour development of Total Place. So I'm sure these are the right sorts of models, but we need to see much, much more vigour and energy and commitment to them, and really learn from which experiments are working and what the elements are that we need to mainstream. I think there have been some really good project initiatives around the country. In my own local authority, we've got a very, very good youth cabinet that enables young people to debate issues that affect them and affect their communities, and seek to meet with decision makers so that they can discuss those problems and look for solutions together. I think it's really important that public policy actually speaks to the concerns and issues that affect young people. If we're talking about the kind of things that matter for young people, the opportunity to get the education they want, to get the jobs that they want, to find the housing that they want, then young people will feel more engaged with the political process. But if it's theoretical discussions about things that do not touch their day-to-day lives, then understandably they're not going to be very interested. Yes, undoubtedly. I think even just last week when we had the Police and Crown Commissioner elections, the incredibly low turnout pretty well across the whole country is something that all politicians ought to be very, very concerned about.